Hello, I'm Robin Worley, welcome to Lenscraft. In the previous video I started to look at some of the compositional tools that can help you with your image editing, but I didn't get time to finish all the example files. I asked the question at the end, did you want to see more? And the overwhelming answer is yes. So here we are, back again, and today I'm going to look at the other files. Well, actually, having recorded the first advanced example, there's not enough time to look at all three files, so I'm going to do those in another video. Today though, we're going to concentrate on this file, and I'm going to show you how to take it to this. Again, it's to do with linking in compositional tools with image editing. Now keep watching until the end of the video because there's something very special that I want to share with you, and it's something that quite a few people have been asking for. Let's start by assessing the image. Immediately I can see two compositional problems with this image. The most obvious problem is that there's a large dark area of the buildings and the shadows, and they're just too distracting. You actually see this a lot where people are shooting landscapes, but they're not using neutral density graduated filters to help balance their exposures. One of the reasons the shadows are so distracting in this example is because of the second problem. There isn't a point of interest in the image. The viewer can't instantly understand why I shot the photo and what is it that they're supposed to be looking at. The reality is, this is one of three images that are actually part of an HDR set I shot. The reason I shot the image was actually the amazing light in the sky and also reflected off the river, but you just can't see it. The image you're looking at is actually the middle exposure from the image set, and I've picked it as an example here because it illustrates well the typical sorts of problems people encounter when trying to shoot landscapes. The plan to fix it is going to be to lighten the buildings on both sides of the river and also to bring out some detail in these shadows. I'm also going to lighten the river itself and increase the contrast in that area, and that's going to help lead your eye through the frame and into the sky. And the sky itself, I'm going to increase the contrast to help attract the eye and hold it there. And I'm also going to try and emphasize some of the shafts of light that you could see at the time but don't come across well in the image at the moment. I should also mention that this was always intended to be a black and white image and not a colour image. Let's get started in Lightroom now, and we're going to try and create a good base image before we start to add any special effects. I'm going to start by adding a graduated filter to select the left side of the image. And just to see where I'm selecting, I'm going to show the mask overlay. And now I'm going to try and clean that up a little bit with the erase brush. Now I've got the auto mask on, I've turned the feather off, and I've got the flow set up at 100, and that means I can now go along and just clean up the edges of the image like that. Down here I'm going to still leave the feathered edge of the graduate, and that's because I want that to blend. Up here I want to be able to adjust the buildings separately from the sky and make a clean adjustment. So I'm okay with that. I can turn off the selected overlay now, and I can actually now start to work on the building. And the first thing I'm going to do is open up the shadows in that area. Now I can do quite a lot just with the shadow slider, but I'm going to actually add in some additional exposure as well to really open up and lighten the image. I'm also going to add contrast because one of the things that's happened here is the image in that area is just lacking contrast. There's nothing to really draw and capture your eye. Now as I do that, it also darkens the image again, but that's okay because remember, this is going to be a black and white image ultimately. And I also like to add in some clarity into these areas because that really makes the highlights pop, and also possibly dehaze, which tends to darken things down a little bit more as well. So overall now I've created quite a nice effect on that left side, and I'm possibly going to now add a similar filter over to the right side. So we'll click new, and I'm going to draw this one in, but I'm going to feather it more. And the reason I want to do that is I want the effect to be stronger on the foreground here than in the background. The background I'm going to remain quite hazy. So again, turn on my mask overlay, and I'm going to now clean up the sky. So my brush tool, erase brush, and I'm using auto mask, and I'm also making sure that the flow is up at 100% so that I can clean all this up in just one adjustment. If you've got your flow less than 100%, you'd have to do multiple brush strokes. Now I've noticed here that the building has just had a little bit of the light area left unselected, so I can clean that up now again with my brush, but I'm going to switch to an A brush, a small brush. And again, that's just gone into the sky, so I'll clean that up. Okay, selection's now good. Turn off the mask, and again I'm going to open up my shadows. And notice that this is acting more on the foreground than the background. I'm going to increase my exposure very slightly, and now I'm going to really ramp up the contrast. And again, the clarity and also the dehaze. Now the clarity and dehaze, when I've used them, because it's at a greater strength here than here, it's emphasised that depth in the image. I'm now happy with the selections there, and I'm going to now switch and use this radial filter, and I'm going to use it to select the foreground here. Just show you where the selection is now. I want to get in the top part of the bridge. And I'm just going to position that further down, so we're selecting the river and a bit of the bridge as well. That looks good. And now I can increase my contrast. I can increase the exposure slightly in that area. That really attracts attention. And I can push the whites up as well in that area and add some clarity. And that should make it really pop. Try a bit of dehaze as well. So straight away we're seeing lots and lots of detail now in the foreground, which adds interest and helps lead your eye. Now the final selection I want to make in this image is to select the sky and adjust that. And probably the easiest way to do that is going to be with the brush tool. So I'll select the brush tool. I'm going to use my A brush. Again, I've got auto mask on. Increase the size of my brush. And I don't want a large feather region in this, because what I want to be able to do is make one single brush stroke to make the selection at full strength. I've just spilled over into the bridge, the building there, so I'll go back to erase and I'll just remove that from that area. And again, up here on this problem area, and we'll paint that back in. And there. So we've got a good selection now. Turn off the mask so we can see what we're doing, and the first thing I want to do is reduce the highlights down to darken that area, so now you can start to see the rays coming in. And now I'm going to push up the clarity to emphasize those rays further, and also now the contrast. And now I'm going to increase the whites in those areas, and we can immediately see something far more interesting going on in the sky. So I'll click done, and we'll go back to the basic tab. Now everything I've done so far has been without any adjustments to the global image, but I'm going to actually increase the colour temperature slightly. That may help us in the conversion later on to black and white. I'm going to push up the clarity just a little bit, open up the shadows a little bit further, pull down the highlights, push up the whites, and also the contrast very slightly. The other thing I want to do is just add a quick vignette effect into this. And that now helps us see the image much more as a good overall image and the basis for a black and white conversion. Now it's not a colour image, as I say, because of the manipulation we've had to do has sort of damaged the colours. If we look now against the starting image, you can see the complete difference we've got. We can actually see something that's much more interesting now rather than the mass we had earlier. So we'll take that over now into Photoshop, where we can edit it further with the Nik Collection. Now, because we want to make the details in this image really pop on either side and in the foreground and just lead your eye through to that great sky, one of the filters I often use for this is the Pro Contrast filter that you find in Color Efex Pro. So let's go down to Start Color Efex Pro. Here we are in Color Efex Pro now, and you can see I've got the Pro Contrast filter actually selected. And the thing that really adds the detail into this is this dynamic contrast slider. And the best way to use it is actually selectively. So I can actually make some selections based on the buildings. Here we are, we can see now we're selecting the foreground buildings largely. Turn that off a moment, and then all we do is increase the dynamic contrast in those areas. And that's emphasise the light and also darken the shadows down. I'm now going to do exactly the same on the other side of the building. And again, I'm going to use that to increase the dynamic contrast in those areas, make it appear that the light is bouncing off this building. I'm also going to increase the contrast itself, and if we turn that off, you can see the difference already. Let's add in an adjustment on the sky there as well. And that can really help boost the sky. And we'll just put one as well onto the highlights in the foreground. And we'll just increase that quite significantly. A lot of black and white images benefit from having these really high contrast levels. If the effect's too strong, as it possibly is here, I can reduce the opacity down on that particular spot. I can do the same if I think it's too strong over here, and also over here. And that tends to have balanced out the image. Just compare it to the starting image. And already there you can see there's an improvement. So I'm going to go with that now as the basis for the next adjustment. Right, now let's get the image into Silver Efex Pro and we can look at the black and white conversion, because we've got a good image there to start with. And straight away in Silver Efex Pro you can see the detail that's available in the image. It's actually now quite an interesting image, even with just the standard neutral conversion. Now the first thing I tend to do when I come into an image like this is select one of the filters to see if they have an improvement on the image itself. Tend not to use blue, because blue just tends to darken things down, but actually in this case I quite like the blue filter and the look that it's creating. Let's try adjusting the strength. And strength, actually, about reducing it down to about 60% seems to work really well with the blue filter on this, so I'm pleased about that. I also want to look now at the sensitivity to the different colours. That can help us balance out the tones in the image now. So let's look at each one in turn. As I move the red slider, there isn't much, although it lightens the buildings. I'm going to actually reduce that down and put it down to a negative value. I like the effect of increasing the yellow in the image. Can't really see any effect from green or cyan. Blue tends to darken just small areas, so I'm going to go to a negative. And violet's not having any effect. Okay, now I'm good to actually start to look at some of the other adjustments we've got in here. One of the filters I really like, or the adjustments I like in this sort of image, is this dynamic brightness. And you can reduce the dynamic brightness to sort of really darken the image down and give it a lot of atmosphere. If you push it the other way, it tends to open it up. Now the nice thing about the dynamic brightness slider is it doesn't tend to blow your highlights and ruin your shadows. The other slider that I tend to use a lot is this soft contrast. Now you can, if you push it over to the right, you can really increase the contrast. It tends to block up details, but if you move it to the left very slightly, you can open up some details. And so pairing it up with this dynamic brightness slider usually does great things. And also the amplified blacks in this case can really darken down some of the areas. Amplify white seems to be having much more of an effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the soft contrast to add the darkness in and amplify the whites. Finally, I'm going to come down to the structure and I'm going to add in some mid-tone structure just to give some detail, and also some highlight structure. And that tends to emphasize these light rays we've got up here. Now I'm just going to push the fine structure down because that tends to really emphasize noise in the image. I'm now going to make sure that I'm not blocking up my shadows and I'm not blowing my highlights too much there. So that's all looking good. And now I can select some of these areas in the sky, and I can now add in some localized contrast on the sky. We'll amplify the whites there as well, and I'm also going to add in just a little bit of structure to really make the details stand out. Now that's really good as an image. What I'm finding is some of the areas here and just here are becoming a little bit too distracting for me. So I'm going to make some other selective adjustments. If I come up here and I select an area there, and I'm just going to darken it down. I'm going to now duplicate that control point and just bring it down here to darken that edge. That's looking good. Over here, actually the image now feels quite a bit more balanced. I am going to select though the bridge in the foreground and just boost the contrast on that, and the whites as well. So what I'm looking at here now is I'm trying to direct the viewer's eye through the composition of the frame to the sky. And I'm also going to just put some light into this area here and increase the contrast on it to show that there's some light falling on it. And that now looks like reflected light on the foreground as well. Finally, I'm going to use the compositional tool we talked about the other day, which was the vignette. And I've gone for one of the standard vignettes to start with. I'm going to choose the size more carefully now, and I'm just going to choose as well where the center of that vignette actually is. Overall, the image is looking a lot better now. I am worried that maybe I'm just applying too much adjustment to the highlights, but that's not too bad as an overall image. So there was the default as brought into Silver Efex Pro, and that's the image after the adjustment. So I'll just now accept that. And there we have our finished image now in comparison to the image that we started with. I just go back and we go back to the first view there, the colour view there, and then the finished black and white there. Now at the start of the video I said I had something rather special to announce at the end. I know a lot of you are really keen to try to get at some of the starting files that I use in these videos. So what I've done is, if you're a member of my Lenscraft website, you can now access and download the file for this video. I'll show you where to get it. If you go over to my website, which is lenscraft.co.uk, I'll put the details down below in the information, and you log in as a member. If you go to the members area and then you go to photo guides and files, down at the bottom of this page you'll find that the files are there, and you can click download and download them, save them to your computer, and then follow along. If you're not a member of the website, don't worry, you can join. If you go to the member join Lenscraft page, you can sign up. It's totally free and you get access to lots of information, discounts and other things in the members area. If you want to see more of this in the future and you want more files to download, just let me know, leave a comment in the comments field, and then I'll know to do more of this sort of thing. I hope you've enjoyed that, found it useful. I'm Robin Worley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you in the next video.
Thank you.